Hello and welcome to our reading of John Dalrymple's Letting Go in Love, Reflections on Spiritual Formation. Just to give you a sense of the book as a whole as we begin, it is written in two parts. The first part is called Sharing in the Divinity of Christ. The second part, Sharing in the Redemptive Work of Christ. Part 1 is divided into 5 sections, the first of which is brief, we'll be reading today. It's entitled Personal Holiness, and is followed by Conversion, Not Peace but the Sword, Dying Before Death, and Suffering in a Christian Perspective. I'll say more about the various sections of Part 2 when we reach it. So, let us begin. John Dalrymple, Letting Go in Love, Reflections on Spiritual Formation. Part 1, Sharing in the Divinity of Christ. Section 1, Personal Holiness. Relationships. Martin Buber said, "All real living is meeting." Man is what his relationships are. They define him, make him the sort of person he is, are his life. Without any relationships, we would not be human beings at all, but mere things. Imagine the difference between leaving 3 tables in a room for a week and leaving 3 human beings together for a week, and you will see the difference, and so understand what constitutes a man. We have 3 basic relationships: to other men, to God, to self. Holiness consists in allowing these relationships to develop in the most human possible way, and letting them be controlled according to the will of God. As a human being grows, these relationships will develop anyway. Seeing that that growth is humanly healthy and in accordance with the gospel is the business of sanctity. With regard to our relationship with our neighbor, the gospel gives us the challenge of loving every other human being, friend and enemy alike. We have to remain open and with a heart of flesh towards all, and avoid letting stony barriers be erected by our fears. There are all sorts of barriers which our fears erect between ourselves and other people. Laziness and self-centeredness is one. We just cannot be bothered to be involved in other people. Envy or jealousy is another, a particularly ugly form of self-centeredness. Anger is a third, both the quick spurt of hatred which alienates others from us and the slow, smoldering sulks we all like to indulge in. The reader can think of other barriers. They are all obstacles to the flow of love between one and another. Another kind of obstacle is the external differences which exist between human beings and which present a challenge to love to overcome. They are the differences of age, temperament, class, race, color, ideology. These barriers are not to be pulled down, thank God for our differences and the human variety they manifest, but they do make love more difficult. A healthy human development means that as we grow closer in love to our fellow human beings, we also grow in our love of God. We have a separate relationship with God, closely connected to our relationship with others. The connection was made explicit by Jesus many times in the gospel, but distinct. This relationship has to be itself developed. This is done chiefly by prayer, the one-to-one relationship or encounter with God. Here, too, there are obstacles of laziness, self-centeredness, and fear to be overcome. They are best overcome not by analysis, but by simply entering into prayer. Face to face with God, we grow in our openness to Him. Prayer takes many forms. Usually we begin by asking God for things we want, petition. But the relationship goes deep when we pass from petition to thanks, saying sorry, loving, celebrating, adoring. Our rapport with God is scarcely anything but superficial till we have developed a mutual relationship of love and spending time together. Together with our relationship to God and neighbor, our relationship to self will grow. As we learn to know God and men and to love them, we find ourselves going deeper in self-knowledge and confident self-affirmation. Theology. To help us in the above growth, which is truly human, we have the teaching and example of Jesus Christ, that most human of men. The four Gospels especially provide an inspiration for men and women to grow in their three basic relationships: to God, to other people, and to self. The teaching of the Sermon on the Mount and the life and death of Jesus are words from God which express this sublimely. Jesus did not leave only an ideal and an example to be followed. Being Son of God as well as man, he reunited the human race to God and remains present as Redeemer in this world, though invisible. Furthermore, his followers have the privilege of being mysteriously, that is, sacramentally, united to him, like the branches of a bush to the parent stem. Initially in baptism, progressively in the Eucharist, Christians can grow closer to the person of Jesus Christ. This union with the person of Christ is mysterious and difficult to understand, but it is real. Another way of describing it is to say that Christians are given the gift of the Holy Spirit to energize their Christian development and lead them into all truth and closeness to God. The work of the Holy Spirit is precisely to promote and support the threefold development of human relations outlined above. We grow towards the Father in prayer, towards men in charity, and ourselves in maturity by the power of the Holy Spirit. The visible reality seems purely human, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. The invisible presence of God's Holy Spirit is the major element discernible to the eyes of faith only. Growth. The Christian mise en scène is therefore the presence of the Holy Spirit in each baptized person, enabling that person to grow in relationship to other people, to God, to self. The more the person grows in those three ways, the closer he or she will be to sanctity. To facilitate this growth, Christians through the ages have developed a variety of practices which can loosely be called religious practices. To help us to love our neighbor, ourselves, and God, we practice daily prayer, examination of conscience, various devotions. We may submit ourselves to a personal rule of life, make a habit of reading the Bible every day, say the rosary, go on pilgrimage, have a spiritual director, join a sodality. The Christian tradition has been fecund in producing a wide variety of these religious practices. Part of the growth towards sanctity is involving ourselves wholeheartedly in the practices we find most helpful. Another part, however, is the recognition of the need for detachment from those practices at the point when they begin no longer to help us towards God, because they have become substitutes for God. Up to a point, religion helps the Christian to know and love God. After that point, it becomes a golden calf, leading men into idolatry and away from God. That point is the moment for detachment, even from religion, in the interests of faith. It is the moment when we have to be clear that religion is to be used adjectively, not as a noun. Worship and adoration belong to God only, not to his creation, however religious. We must worship and cling unconditionally to God, not to our rule of life or to anything else. Otherwise, we will be guilty of making the relative absolute, as the scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' day did with the law. Mystery. The growth towards sanctity will especially involve a radical detachment from the words, concept, and theology surrounding our knowledge of God. Prayer leads us straight into the heart of mystery, where we find that words fail, concepts no longer help, knowing gives way to unknowing. At this point, man is no longer in control and is therefore insecure and lost. If he does not turn back at this point in order to regain control, but perseveres into the cloud of unknowing, he will be rewarded with the peace that passes understanding and the experience of being grasped by God. Then all the three relationships he started out with remain, but coalesce in a marvelous way. He becomes one with himself, with God, and with God's creation. That is what God intends to happen to us all. In the Christian vocabulary, this is God's will, your sanctification. Next time, Section 2, Conversion.